This is Maharajas of Scale, a podcast where we go behind the scenes and talk to founders who are demolishing the myths around building and scaling a big business in India. These are the stories that have shattered the assumptions around Indian consumers and are changing the game completely. I am Krishna Jonakadla, serial entrepreneur, co-founder of Flit, the fashion locator in town, and startup mentor, bringing you these stories. Hey everyone, rainy, gloomy, cloudy afternoon, Thursday afternoon in the month of December in Bangalore. We have a young entrepreneur amongst us today. And the funny thing is, this recording is happening during a real winter, but possibly a crypto summer. And with Bitcoin again about to touch its peak of around $20,000, we are speaking to Ashish Singhal of CoinSwitch, who seems to be making big strides in that. Ashish, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Krishna. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So Ashish, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're working on right now. And if you could do a little bit of intro about CoinSwitch as well in that'd be great.
Sure. Awesome. So myself, Ashish, I come from a computer science background, an engineer myself, coming from NSIT Delhi. Started my career with Amazon, then Livspace, founded Urban Tailor, and then CoinSwitch Kuber, which is now changing the way people invest in cryptocurrencies in India. Being a hacker at heart, I've won almost every major hackathon in India, me and my team together. And being hacker at heart is what has helped us navigate this crypto journey or any journey of entrepreneurship in our life. And happy to touch upon those points as we go on in our conversation.
Awesome. How did you end up doing, or how did you end up being in the place where you are at right now?
So I'm a problem solver at heart. From even my school days, right? I love to solve problems, right? And although it may seem like a thing where a lot of people talk about and it's kind of frowned upon now, but I always wanted to change the word, like coming to Steve Jobs, right? Make a dent in the universe, right? So that is what I always got fascinated by, and I always wanted to do something big. Something big, not in terms of monetary or creating a big value company, but solving a problem. I was always fascinated by Google, right? How they simply changed the world entirely, right? I was in my early days of school. I was really fascinated how Google kind of simplified the way people find information, right? And I wanted to build in my career over time to be something like this, to be involved in something like this, right? And after my graduation from computer science and SIT, I joined Amazon. I've worked in a lot of teams there. I was lucky to be part of 3 Jeff B teams. So if you don't know what Jeff B teams are, Jeff Bezos himself picked like 20 people out of the company, put them in a room and gave them an impossible task to do, right? And you have to do that task within a certain timeline, right? And I was leading Prime Now. Was the 1 hour delivery service was one such Jeff B team, which I was leading from India, which launched Amazon's 1 hour delivery service in New York. Later got expanded to 8 more countries, including India. In India, it's called Prime Now. So that's where, that problem solving has been throughout my life. Being an engineer, I was really fascinated by cryptocurrencies by reading Bitcoin white paper in 2014. Got a little bit engaged into running Bitcoin nodes in 2015, 16, and finally in 2017 realized my decision of simplifying cryptocurrencies in the global world by forming CoinSwitch with my very close friends. We've been friends for 13 years, Vimal and Govind, who are obviously my hackathon partners as well. And that's where we started our journey, and that's what it led us to today, where we are building the biggest and simplest cryptocurrency exchange in India, CoinSwitch Kuber, which lets you buy cryptocurrencies in a single click, as simple as ordering food online on Swiggy, right? So that's where we are, and this is the path that led us to this point.
Interesting. Are you an IIT grad?
No, I am from NSIT, Delhi College of Engineering, if you know, the sister college. Yeah.
Right. So, what you said, you've always been a problem solver. And the funny thing is, when I see some entrepreneurs, they demonstrate these streaks very early on in their life, right? It would be a little bit of, it would be a little immodest to quote my own example, but right now I'm not getting any other. I think in the year 1994 or 1995, Michael Port, Gary Hamel, and C.K. Prahalad, two well-known management gurus, wrote a book called The Future of Competition. And in that book, there is a theory called the theory of core competence. Essentially, if you see most successful companies, they've stripped away. For instance, Steve Jobs famously, the oft-quoted aspect is, it's in anything in strategy, the most toughest thing is to say no. And it is about the projects that you don't do that make a difference versus the projects that you actually do. And that is what core competence, the theory of competition, the future of competition. And when I read that book, I think I was all of 14 years or something. And when I read it, it was when I read it and I read their interviews in paper, I'm like, this is like a no-brainer. It is. Why do you need a whole book to understand this concept? You just can understand it easily. And I was fascinated with enterprises and startups from a very young age, and then that streak has continued. So, what part of your problem-solving streak did you demonstrate when you were a youngster, when you were in high school, and things like that?
Sure. So, I've solved a lot of problems when I was young, when I was in school, always, trying to ace exams, always trying to build things, build programs, even in schools, trying to hack the system, right? That's always been my approach, trying to figure out what kind of questions would come in the exam, and rather preparing from them, rather than preparing the entire course, has something of that I always, and, looking at those questions in the exam, I knew that, I would ace it anyway, because I prepared for those questions, right? So those kind of hacks. But what really, like you pointed out, right? Saying no to projects is what makes you a good entrepreneur. You don't learn this lesson on day one. And if somebody tells you on day one saying no, then you would just be finding ways to say no to things, right? But when you look back in your journey, then you relate and understand where you are. What has led you here is by saying no to a lot of things and saying yes to the right things, which has led you to this point, right? One such, if I have to look back, obviously not in school and some in college, but what I would say has put me here today is by learning that startups are not what they seem to be, right? People believe startups are about ideas. Tomorrow I'll wake up, have an idea about iPhones, which will change the entire world, right? And my iPhone would be used by everyone in the world. Bill Gates had an amazing idea of personal computers, which now every one of us is sitting in front of a computer, right? They think that startups are like that, right? But when I look back in my journey, what I have learned is startups are counterintuitive in nature, right? Startups are not about idea; they are about building things, right? Building things consistently and pushing through all the things that you get across, right? And how I get to this point by learning about counterintuitiveness is again through hackathons. If you think about hackathons, you would believe that hackathons are about building things. A coder getting into a room for 48 hours, building an amazing code out there, right? And through my hackathon journey, I learned that there are things in life which are counterintuitive, which we don't learn in school, colleges. Because in school, colleges, almost everything is very straightforward. There is an exam, you know that you have to study this to ace that exam. You have a company coming on campus, you know what kind of questions to prepare to ace that interview, right? But there are things in life which are counterintuitive, startups being one of them. But I learned about startup being counterintuitive through hackathons, right? And I learned through hackathons. In first year of my hackathon journey, I lost 7 hackathons, one after the another, which made me realize that probably I'm not as good as I think I am. But when I look back, I realized that hackathons were not about building things. They're about ideas. they're about selling things better, making things good, but selling things better. So in a hackathon, you can't simply say that I will build a habitat on Mars, but what you can do is sell that we can build a habitat on Mars by showing that we can build a rocket which will take us to Mars, right? Startups are completely opposite. For startups to succeed, you have to actually build a habitat on Mars to be able. So building a rocket will not help you. Right. Getting to Mars and realizing that on the way, whether Mars is the right planet or even Venus is the right planet, and figuring those things out would make you succeed at a startup, right? So to be honest, I can't point to a single point which kind of, I can showcase which led me to here. But when I look back, these are small points which I can, walk through and which help me understand startups or where I am in my journey a little better, connecting the points backwards, not forwards, right? So
very interestingly put, I should say. And I'm glad that you're in some sense focusing on the execution, the building aspect of it. And last year, there are a couple of entrepreneurs who are wildly successful in a different sort of a business. And there was this man who's actually Indian. He's a multimillionaire entrepreneur in direct distribution in the US. And he happens to be a friend's friend. And we sat down and we were in general talking about startups in India. He was talking about startup scene. And he made a comment. And I kept telling him how in the Indian context, there is to a certain degree, there is so much importance attached to conceptual things. And even today, there isn't a degree of pragmatic or reality-driven thinking in many places. We still hang on to older notions. And he said, Krishna, this is sort of endemic of what happens here. We have a lot of mysticism attached with practically everything. And it actually starts with the spiritual things that we have, where somebody has achieved nirvana or whatever, and then everybody else is just following that person and not really actually practically exploring what it means to be in nirvana, and what does it take to be traverse towards nirvana, right? And then if you see that same thing repeats in other places, and then he contrasts that to other ecosystems across the world, maybe the Israeli ecosystem. And this is not just endemic of the startup system, but it is sort of in the work culture, right? Where he says the focus is on somehow mystifying things, as opposed to being a stoic and then saying, this is exactly what's working, let's just do it. So you're absolutely right that there should be so much conversation about building it, execution, whereas the conversation is all on the other side, right? And it is all about ideas. Ideas are important. I think it would be sort of a wrong notion to say that ideas are unimportant. But on any given day, a beautifully executed average idea will look 10 times more better than a badly executed or even an idea on paper, right? Yeah. So you're very aptly put. So I have an interesting question about the hackathon part. So in what you said, you actually contrasted hackathons and startups as direct contrast with each other, right? A hackathon is about selling that, while a startup is about
building that,
providing that experience.
Yes,
it's much more than building it, isn't it? Because for instance, I wrote a post on our site about MVPs, and then I quote two very famously quoted people, Henry Ford and then Steve Jobs. When Henry Ford was asked why he doesn't do market research, he quipped apparently that if I asked consumers what they wanted, they would just tell me they want faster horses. And then Steve Jobs says that in a different way. He says consumers don't know what they want until you show it to them.
Yeah.
Right? So in some sense, startups are that, because you can't just say, I'll put you on, I'll do a colony on Mars. This is the rocket. This is what this test drive looks like. and then you put them into that maybe zero gravity capsule and then make them feel that, until and unless you show that, they cannot even fathom that. But I've never heard anybody do that contrast. And you all of a sudden changed my own notion of what a hackathon actually stands for. I was under the impression that it is sort of this compressed timeline in which you've taken some seemingly impossible idea and made it look possible. Was that always the case, or when did you change your perspective on hackathons?
So I started my Amazon journey in 2011, right? I always thought of myself as a good coder, right? If you throw a problem at me, I can code it out, right? So when so Sequoia was doing one of the biggest hackathons of theirs first time in 2013 called Sequoia Hack, right? And at that time, I thought, okay, I'll participate in this and I'll definitely win it, right? I'm a good coder. I'm smart. Why wouldn't I win it, right? So I went in there. I went in with a great idea that, okay, this idea, if I can implement this would change the world, right? So I went in there. I coded till 7 a.m. Me and my team coded till 7 a.m. The results or the submission was at 3 p.m. And at that time, we realized that we didn't have enough time to code the entire thing, right? And that's where I left that hackathon broken a bit, doubting myself a bit, whether I'm as good as I think that I am, right? And at that point, I thought that probably I'm not good. I have to learn more. I will participate in next N hackathons that happens that year and try to win at least one of them, right? I participated in 7 more hackathons and I lost each and every one of them. When I looked back, so in 2014, when I looked back, right, why did I lose? What was the difference between me and the other participants who won that hackathon, right? So I realized that although their ideas were great as well, but what they were showcasing was something else, right? So what they were showcasing was just a part of it. They didn't have to prove that this can tomorrow become a company. If with this code, I push it tomorrow to users, this becomes a usable product. What they were solving is an important aspect of that problem, right? Of that idea, rather than solving the entire idea itself, right? And that is what made judges realize, oh, if these guys have solved this, then they can realize that big idea. And now they can relate to that big idea and think of it as a grand thing that people have solved, right? So once we realized that, I kind of formalized it in a single sentence: make something good, but sell something better. Which may sound, to be honest, as like, build something random and just sell it. But it was about building that rocket, right? Show them a path to reach Mars, right? You don't have to build an habitat on Mars. Show them a path to Mars, and then tell how you will set up on Mars once you have that rocket up and running, right? So it was about that. And from that point onwards, every hackathon that I participated on, I have won. And being luckily the last hackathon that I participated in was 2015 Sequoia Hack again. And that we not only won the category prize, but we won the overall hackathon, the best hack of that hackathon, right? And that's where we ended our hackathon journey, because we achieved what we wanted from that, right? A validation as well as understanding of what hackathons are, right? So this is the journey on how we understood what hackathons were and how to ace them, to be honest.
Very interesting. I think it's sort of like a pitch that you would do to a potential investor, isn't it? Because the fundamental thing is you have this vision that you're painting, and in some sense it's a bit foolhardy to think that you can at least provide a big window into that vision in just a couple of days of time that you have, right? There are some that sneak up on you. So for instance, if I've seen these financial hackathons where a bank unleashes a big amount of data, and then the bank doesn't themselves know what they want with it, and then they'll give you access to that data and say, what can you make out of it? And over a period of maybe 24 to 36 hours, teams of programmers and maybe cross-functional people are looking at it, and then they look at patterns of data, and from that they form a hypothesis. So that's a different kind. But in this case, it's a different kind. You have some sort of a semblance of an out contour that's provided, and then they'll tell you, okay, this is a problem we are solving, or rather, this is the problem universe or the problem topic on which you come up with interesting perspectives, and you have a vision. For that, you provide a microcosm of an example of how that works and say, I do not have these pieces today, but this is how I will get to these pieces. And then what it actually demonstrates is the depth and the width to which you are able to think through and then articulate that, right? So it's sort of a masterclass in selling or even positioning that you went through right now, very aptly put.
So you rightly pointed out, it's like similar to how you pitch to an investor, right? On day one, your company would not have even enough resources, enough power to build the entire vision that you set out for your company, right? It needs time, patience, and continual effort, right? But for an investor, what makes more sense is if you tell them, this is what we have today, this is what we have solved. These are the next few problems that we would be solving to achieve that final outcome, right? And that is how you sell them. But how would you succeed at a startup? By actually solving all those pieces together.
So let's get onto the Amazon angle a bit.
Sure.
You were with Amazon in India, I suppose.
Yes. So I worked across multiple countries as well, based on projects. So I worked a little bit in Seattle as well, New York as well, but I was employed in Amazon India, but visiting across to solve certain projects. Yeah. Sure.
So 2011 is way before anyone, while Amazon was known in India, and in some sense, even then it was still very much a US-centric company, maybe vastly, widely known in the US and the Western Hemisphere more than India.
Yes.
And the Indian business had barely begun, maybe not even existent at that point.
Not even started at that point. Yeah.
Right? So in effect, you were working on their global businesses. And that would make it, in some sense, a dream job for a lot of youngsters today as well, right? Notwithstanding the fact that Amazon has India operations. How did you end up at Amazon? How did that happen?
So just a college campus placement. So Amazon came in. It was obviously the dream job. Obviously, Google, Amazon were the two places that we want to be. I couldn't go. When I went through Google, got rejected. Amazon was the next choice. And I luckily got through, and that is how I ended up joining Amazon.
So from a dream job on to leaving the dream job.
Yes.
Right? How did that happen?
So I always wanted to learn more, do more. I could see my efforts at Amazon being highly appreciated at Amazon as well. My managers were amazing. I worked with some of the most amazing folks that I could ever work with at Amazon. But the learning curve kind of changes, right? And you want to aspire for something more, right? My father always say that, work for yourself. And that is something that since childhood I wanted to do, right? I wanted to stand on my own feet. I don't mean to, say that people who work at Amazon don't do good for themselves, but I want to see that for me, particularly me, what was important was to solve a problem which others are not solving, or which I could relate to and I would want to solve, right? And it doesn't matter what the outcome lies. Probably I will learn a lot from that experience, right? So for me, that learning was the shift that I wanted, and that is the reason I ended up leaving Amazon in 2015.
Very interesting. In some sense, people would call that passion, where you have a certain passion. It is one thing to solve problems. What the fascinating aspect of what you said right now is I've constantly maintained that thousands and perhaps lakhs of hundreds of thousands of people in India, both the software side and the non-software side, work for all these global corporations. They've never truly met the customer. And many of them are not even involved in the sales process. and any part of the sales cycle. Most of them are a good chunk of them are support jobs and everything around it. So they don't have an understanding of what are the emotional aspects of that consumer, what are the contextual cultural aspect of that customer or that consumer, and therefore there is a great degree of distance, right? So there's absolutely no understanding, and it would be impractical to expect empathy when there is no understanding about that consumer.
So I would disagree a bit here, Krishna.
Okay.
Actually, all my customer empathy comes from Amazon, right?
So
Amazon
hold there. I'm not talking about you.
Sure.
I'm saying large swaths of them. But in your case, you're working on a product Prime now, where you had to be part of a team. You were part of a team where that customer understanding is very crucial, right? So you're at the bleeding edge of that product,
Sure.
right? But what happens is, in most of these cases, people are not even working anywhere closer to near a customer. They have no clue how money is earned. What is a sales cycle? So what is that? What that has created is set of people that are just focused on certain outcomes. I'm oversimplifying it, and I'm admitting to that. But there are a few people that actually take a step back, like you, and say, if this is what I could do with Prime now, the next evolution is this energizes me. I want to solve a problem which I can directly relate to or be passionate about, and I want all my efforts to translate into extraordinary outcomes for that problem and the people that are facing that problem, right? You actually went a step further and said, I relate to that. And it also comes with the other side of having your own freedom and flexibility, right? So that's interesting.
So let me add one point here, Krishna. You pointed out absolutely brilliantly on, solving the problem that you could relate to.
Right.
And to be honest, when I left Amazon, I didn't think of it, right? And I made a mistake. Let me tell you that story, right? Okay. So after leaving Amazon, I started a company called Urban Tailor, right? We were trying to create fit and size, creating custom clothing for people. And we always thought that, if I give you the clothing in your size and fit, why would you go to a ready-made outlet when I can give you at the same price the same clothing, right? Mm-hmm. But at that point, and we raised a lot of money. We had an amazing team out there, and we were too passionate to solve this problem. But after a year, the number of problems just kind of increased so much that we couldn't solve it. And even though we had money in the bank, we decided to call it off, right? And when I looked back into that journey, that one thing that I realized was my relatability to the problem wasn't there. I was still wearing, ready-made clothes, and I wasn't too worried about, custom clothes myself. Although we were smart people, and someone out there would definitely solve that custom fit problem, and we could have given it more hard work and, more passion to solve it. But where I gave up was because my relatability to the problem kind of fell apart, right? And that's where I decided that I will not do a startup just to do a startup, to build something on my own, to have flexibility and things like that. To be honest, those things, for me at least, doesn't matter at all. For me, what matters is the kind of problem that I'm working on. Even under someone, that is absolutely fine. Even in a big company, that is absolutely fine. As long as the scale of the problem is very high and I can relate to that problem. So today, when we started CoinSwitch, we didn't start it as a company. We started as a hack, which we built for 3 of us, which later become a company once we realize that the same problem which we are facing, right? So that relatability has driven us till today. And today, even after 3 years of this company formation, we keep on fighting with the same passion and energy because we could relate to that problem so well, right? So your point is absolutely valid, but some people realize it a little later, right? They don't realize it at the point of when they're making that decision, right? They may make that decision like I made a mistake in that, maybe because of other factors. Maybe I wanted to learn how the different cycles work, rather than figuring out, is this the right problem for me to solve, right? So yeah.
Very interesting. I have personally, in all the things, the only time I have personally built something, I don't know, maybe that's just my own nuance, is the very first startup that I did, which was a startup called eAdvocate, a case flow automation software for legal firms. That was an outgrowth of my co-founder, whose neighbor was an attorney, and he was trying to solve that problem for him. But from everything that I've done after that, he falls into this scratch your own itch, kind of a problem. In the US, I would routinely go into electronic stores, and then before I had to pick up a product, there was no way I had any information. Is this product well rated? How many people have bought it? What are they saying? So I'm at the electronic store, and I have no such information. So the first product that I built was a review aggregation tool, where I could just text, and this was pre-smartphone. I could text the name of the product, and then the server would actually
give you the
crawl the web dynamically, aggregate all the reviews, and give you a one-page summary. Now it got completely lambasted by the smartphone era, because we were just about 6 months prior to that, and then ever since then I wanted to watch a lot of Indian films, and there was no easy way to watch them. And Mango Mobile TV that I built as a streaming platform was an outgrowth of that. So what I'm working on right now is also a problem that I have faced personally. But you're absolutely right. Somewhere in between, there was a period where I went astray. And when I did that, I remember, I faced a lot of confusion. I was lost for a certain amount of time. I was not able to articulate what is the problem I'm solving, who am I solving it for. It felt like there was a notional set of people.
Yeah.
We were lost for 18 months. But at the end of 18 months, it was in the same fashion industry. But at the end of 18 months, we had absolute clarity on the model that we were working for. We had run out of energy and money. That's a different thing altogether. But so the problem relatability is an absolute...
I call it in two ways. So either you are so empathetic of a person that you can relate to other people's problem and make it your own and work on it, or it has to be your problem, right? For me, at least, in my limited understanding of startups, these are the two factors which will drive you to build something great.
Yeah, but I think it's a combination. Akio Morita, the founder of
obviously,
Sony,
over time, you can't be solving just your problem. You have to solve a bigger use case. I'm saying when you start up, when you do that first, take your first step.
Right.
These are the two things that matters, at least in my experience.
Yeah. So, but let me go back to the Urban Tailor founding moment. So you quit. Was it immediately after you quit Amazon, or did you take some time finding your feet?
Actually, I took a sabbatical from Amazon for 4 months actually. And at that time I was exploring a lot of things. I couldn't find the thing so at that point I didn't knew that I should not be finding startup ideas, right? I should be finding problems to solve, right? So that was immaturity at that point. And meeting Vasu, Lavanya from Urban Tailor, I got really excited by their vision and what they are trying to solve. And I always thought that I could contribute to that solution. And being a problem solver, that problem seemed too amazing to pass on for me. And during that sabbatical period, I decided to take this jump. How
did you meet them?
Through a common friend who was again a mentor of mine from Amazon, who introduced me, who knew what I was looking for, and he connected me to similar minded people, and that's how we started talking about Urban Tailor.
Interesting. On the Urban Tailor business though, I think you went through an evolution. You did go through an evolution, right? Initially it was about custom fit clothes, and then eventually it was about getting a troop of tailors to make sure they were altered properly, they were done properly, stitched properly. Since I have you, I've always wondered, take Swiggy and then Zomato today, for example. While we are starting to have cloud kitchens today, which do not have a B2C component, they're not directly serving any customers and then patrons themselves. They are manufacturing all of it, which was in some sense what Urban Tailor initially was. And then in your pivot, eventually you started having, tailors, clothes getting picked up, stitched, and then delivered back. I always used to wonder, given the ubiquity of so many tailors across India, the darjis and the tailors, there is in every normal neighborhood, with the exception of, let's say, Mahadevpura, Whitefield, where they're just urban jungles. They haven't allowed for any of these kind of people to spring up. So that demographic I can understand is definitely a lot of businesses have been established purely for the Whitefield, Electronic City, Mahadevpura, user, right? And it's a niche. But once it comes out of that, a different set of cultural factors come into play. But I always wondered, for the non that area crowd, leveraging the local tailor would have provided the necessary impetus. Was that ever on your mind, or did you?
We were aggregating local tailors, so we didn't had any tailor on payroll, and that was the whole process.
I see.
That through software and through our basically building an engineering arm, like Uber built an engineering arm over the aggregation of cabs, right? Cab existed before, cab still exists, but through the facilitation happens through Uber, right? That is what we wanted to build as well, right? But we got into a different set of problems, that quality control becomes the major issue in terms of making sure that quality is getting delivered across the board with the tailor that we are aggregating on board, right? So that had become a major problem, and that was one of the major reasons because of which we had to move away from that problem.
Interesting. And then you took some time to work on CoinSwitch, or did it come out of a hackathon?
So we were working. After Urban Tailor, I joined Livspace, and I worked there for a year. I was always interested in cryptocurrencies, and in 2016 there was a point where it was kind of picking up, right? I've told all my friends that buy crypto, it's gonna blow up and things like that, and every one of us were like, at the end of the evening after working at Livspace, used to huddle together and try to figure out what more to buy, where to invest, and things like that, right? At that point we realized that since the price of a crypto depends on demand and supply, right? Every exchange has a different demand and supply, so the price of a crypto varies across exchanges. We wanted to build something like a Make My Trip for ourselves, where at any given point in time we can see which exchange has the best rate and quickly convert through the APIs, right? And have the extra edge which other people don't have in the market, right? Because everyone is trying to trade and get the best deal. We would obviously get the best deal when we get the best rate to start with, right? So that was the idea that all of us, kind of built together for ourselves. And then we thought that, if this is our problem, I'm sure that, others would be facing the same issue as well. And we made it public. And within a month of our launch, we were doing $1 million in GMV a day, right? So with no marketing, even today, right? Only in the last 3 months, we have started doing marketing. Till last 3 months, we didn't even had a marketing team. And through our global product, we were doing over $300 million a month in GMV, and a profitable company making $10 to $15 million in revenue every year, right? Before entering India. So after we entered India, our objective still remained the same, right? How do we give people the simplicity of getting into crypto? Crypto is too complex in itself, right? For a normal user to get into crypto is very hard, even today in India, right? So how can we allow them an experience which is same as Swiggy or Zomato? Just add to cart and check out, food is at your home. We wanted that kind of experience to allow retail users to get into crypto. Just select whatever you want to buy, tell the amount, and that's it, right? And that is what we built in India called CoinSwitch Kuber. And in the last 6 months, we have seen amazing success in CoinSwitch Kuber. Today, we have over 800,000 users doing almost $5 million a day in GMV and hopefully reaching 1 million users in the next 10 to 15 days. So it has been an amazing journey all throughout. Obviously, it's ups and downs, but consistently trying to solve user problem has been our mantra to reach where we are today.
So ups and downs, talk about some of the ups and downs.
So biggest down point I would say is 23rd April 2018 when RBI banned cryptocurrency. And we officially started our company in December 2017. So just 4 months into the company, the ban happened. And we always thought that, India would be that market where we would simplify crypto. And the goal that I kept for myself or my team, simplification cannot be quantified, right? Nobody can tell you when your product is simple. Simple is just a notional thing, right? Some people may say it's simple today. Some people may say, no, it's still complicated, right? So the parameter that we kept for ourselves is that the day our parents can buy cryptocurrency is the day we will tell that we have simplified and we have simplified crypto and we have solved that use case, right? But after RBI ban, we couldn't innovate in India anymore, right? So we had to go outside. We had to do this business in 160 plus countries and grow there. Keeping with being a crypto company, another set of challenges hit where Google banning crypto ads, Facebook banning crypto ads, Twitter banning crypto ads. So a traditional startup usually grow by getting users through these networks, right? Because you are able to target very pinpoint target of your user segments, right? But we grew through another channels, doing the right things, doing SEO, doing organic growth, building referral, building organic channels, which led us to our over 20x growth in the last 3 years with spending $0 on marketing, right? So these were some of the challenges and some of the things that we had to do to overcome those challenges.
Interesting. So talk about that 20x growth. So that I'm sure that's going to be a pretty fascinating thing to hear. Yes. Not every day you come across all sorts of articles and then stories that talk about $0 marketing. But when you click and then when you read that, there are all sorts of mythical things that they seemingly have done. But in your case, you have actually done it. So let's peel that orange a little bit and get in deeper.
So in the global market, obviously we couldn't compete with the exchanges which were out there. They had too much money and we got funded by Sequoia, but we had limited funds, and we always wanted to build a company which is led not by the freemium model, right? Where you pay user to use your product. We always wanted to solve. So we believe the day the user is willing to pay for your service, at that day that you have solved his problem, right? So we wanted to solve user problem and not just compete on pricing for that matters, right? So at that point, we knew that a lot of users are facing the problem, and that is why our product exists. We start finding these users. Where do these people exist? If they have a problem, what are they doing today to get to a solution? 3 things come to mind. They're either asking their friends and family, they're either searching on Google, or they're going to forums to ask different users on solving their problem. So we started attacking these 3 fronts, and to solve these 3, there is no growth hack or there is no hack at all, right? You have to do things incrementally. You have to start building on SEO, making sure that your content repository is good enough to be helping your users. And obviously over time, Google will start to recognize that and start to rank your articles higher and higher, right? At one point in our journey, we were covering 40% of overall worldwide crypto queries on Google on first page, on first 3 links, right? So that was the extent that we went to get in front of our users. In terms of community building on Reddit, on Telegram, on WhatsApp, and making sure that whenever our users has a problem, doesn't matter whether they have a problem particularly where our product can help, but helping crypto users in general has become our mantra. If people are having problem in terms of understanding what private keys are, we would go there and tell them about what private keys are, help them understand crypto better. and slowly they learn about who we are and relate to the brand, that become that user-centric brand, right? Which is there to help the user. We are not pushing marketing content to you. We are helping you out. If you feel that this product could be helpful to you, please use it. If you don't see that this could be useful, please find, or we'll help you find a product that can help your problem, right? We started with these approaches, and I think these work wonderfully well for us, achieving that 20x growth without marketing dollars spent. And obviously, once you solve these two, you inherently solve the third one, where your users becomes your brand ambassadors, and they start promoting you to their friends and family, and that's how they get to know about you, right? So nothing outstanding, but doing the basics right has put us where we are today.
Very, very beautifully put. Very incredibly put. I have never. Right now, I've co-founded a startup called Vouch, which is essentially a digital escrow product. So there's a lot of payment fraud, and the funny thing is, when you said what is the relatable problem that you have, and I had faced it, and even today I have a transaction that's going on right now, where the ability to have another person protect the money and act as a buffer plays a huge role, the amount of value. And I'm seeing that it's a problem that I'm regularly facing, not just isolated once in. So it's a high frequency problem. And when I looked around, a lot of people have that problem, right? Millions of them. But for me, for us, the problem is sort of very generic in nature. But when we contrast that with crypto, it's an identified set of people who have said they hang out in these forums, they hang out on these threads. So that user type, that user persona. Yeah. And if for example, what are altcoins, right? Will Bitcoin go up in value? For instance, there's so much content and set of questions out there. They have self-identified themselves, right? Saying, okay, here are my queries, and therefore it provides you a rich universe of options, but it still doesn't tell you who is a potential coin switch user, right? In all of these queries, possibly there are one or two queries where people are asking, hey, I see the fees on X exchange are too high. Is there some place where I can find out where is the best or the lowest spread so that I lose the least amount of money for when I buy crypto or when I sell crypto, right? So in 100 queries or maybe in 1,000 queries, there are only 4 or 5 people that are asking those queries, which actually makes your job a little more tougher, because there is no way you can directly find those queries. You have to answer all of these 900 odd, and then in the process, you'll stumble upon these.
Exactly.
And then you get to these users, and you have to, I would convince is possibly the wrong word. You have to earn their
trust. So in 2018 and 17 when we launched, right? So trust was the biggest factor, because crypto was just picking up, right? And people didn't know which services to trust, because people could just, take away your money, right? And run away. You would never know. How would a person sitting in, say, Amsterdam trust a service built in India, right? So creating that trust. Let me tell you a story about our trust building exercise as well. We were 3 co-founders. We were the first one in the crypto industry that I know of. I don't want to claim it, but we were the first one to introduce live chat, because we knew people had so many questions that nobody's answering them in crypto. Why not run a live chat and talk to our users directly, figure out what their problems are, what the next problem they are having, even after using CoinSwitch. And we used to cover 8-hour shift among ourselves to cover all 24 hours of the day. We did it for the 2 months of the launch to understand more about our users, more about where they hang out, what they do, what are the next set of problems we should be solving, and things like that, right? And that's how the evolution of CoinSwitch happened over time, right? In India as well, when we launched in India, right? When in March, the RBI ban got lifted in March 2020, and we decided to look back in India. This is exactly how we thought, what we need to build in India is, again comes to the same problem which we started in 2017. How do we make it simple that our parents could buy crypto in India, right? We started with that notion again and launched our product CoinSwitch Kuber in India on June 1st, 2020. And in the 6 months window, we have already grown to over 800,000 users, right? Obviously, in that, we have some marketing help, but most of it, almost 70% of our users are direct, organic, and referrals, right?
How did that happen? How did that 70% happen? That is that there's definitely a story behind that.
Yes. So that is to do with emotions, right? So first emotion that come to retail user while investing in crypto is the risk, is whether I lose all my money or not, right? So our idea was a little different than other companies out there. So what we wanted to do, we wanted to give kind of a notional value. Whenever a user downloads the app through a friend and through referral, we wanted to give some amount of money in his wallet right away. He hasn't invested that money onto the app, but he now is, to be honest, invested in the crypto market because he has money lying there. So he can follow the ups and downs. He starts to get to learn why it is going up, why it is going down, right? So although it was a very small money, but the kind of emotions that get attached of that user to the application, what helped him eventually convert and learn about this market. Obviously, we do a lot of things in education, helping him grow. Why this crypto makes sense as an investment class? Why is it so risky? What is the right worth to invest in? Should you invest a big amount? We always say no. We always say invest 3 to 4% of your portfolio into a risky asset class. So guiding them through that process. And once they see that they have some value already invested and they see it going up and down, they get that curiosity to learn more, right? And that's how we were able to crack the referral part of it, right? And that has given us a lot of growth because people are now able to relate to it. Without investing themselves, they can still relate to the market and would want to learn more and more as the day go by, right? So that has helped me. So creating those emotional connects with the user, obviously simplifying the entire process, making it a one-click buy sell at the best rate without going to multiple exchanges and things like that, has helped us in the product differentiation. And to be honest, even today we don't have a direct competitor because the kind of technology we have built in 2.5 years, we applied that in India. And the kind of simplification we are able to do in India is nobody else is able to provide today, right? But apart from that, I think these are the few connecting to the users emotionally and helping them learn about this industry has helped us in our growth so far.
Fabulous. That was fantastic. In fact, it hits so much more closer home. I can't tell you, this is awesome. There is one, until recently I used to work with a crypto company called Switch Blockchain Labs. I was the global business head, and there were a couple of products that we had just launched until COVID hit and a lot of things changed. But what you said is the discussions, a mentor of mine and I, we would sit down and constantly ask ourselves the same question. There is going to be a moment in the crypto industry where somebody is going to come along and say, this is all, this key, this hash, this double ledger entry, all of this, they're going to take it all away. And then they're going to make it as simple as buying everyday things. That's one moment, which I think, you guys are doing. So 3 cheers to you. And the other aspect is the emotional side of people and users is not understood at all. The funny thing is we live life emotionally and justify it rationally.
Yes.
Right? There is an old saying that goes, people buy things emotionally and justify it rationally. But I think we can actually say we live life emotionally and justify it rationally and explain why it happened to us. The aspect that you need to understand the emotional side of users And actually, it's not a game. You're not taking advantage of it or anything. You're saying, hey, your emotions are important. We know your emotions are important to you. Your emotions are important to us as well. So when you get that equation right and you put a good product out there, it need not be a phenomenal product, because again, like you said, a simple product, a phenomenal product is an evolution. It's a concept, right? There may be a moment at some point in time where you said, if my parents are able to understand crypto and then buy crypto like they do everything else, then I have simplified it. Take remotes today, for example. You Chromecast and then Fire Stick. The Fire Stick exemplifies what it means to have a streaming stick, which parents can use. When I use Chromecast at home, my dad can't use it.
Yes.
And for the world of me, I don't get it. Amazon definitely has a lot of things going, so awesome. But the referral part, creating a small incentive where you actually give them a stake in the crypto world without actually telling them, hey, that I'm actually giving you a stake. And as soon as somebody told you, I gave you that stake. And there's a funny story. Warren Buffett, when he used to give gifts to his grandchildren and his children every year for Christmas, apparently never used to give them material things. He would always give them shares in companies. And these were very thoughtful companies, because these were companies that Buffett himself would invest. So what he gave his kids was these shares. So the kids would look at it and say, what is it? And then in some sense, he was initiating them into investing, right? It's very, very smartly done. But where does all this thinking come from, Ashish? So it is one thing to do all of this, but I'm more fascinated about where does this thinking come from?
I think this thinking comes from, so let me, so you didn't ask one question, Krishna, which I will anyway answer.
Sure.
So did my parents ended up buying crypto? After Kuber launch, I think within 1 week of Kuber launch, they were able to buy themselves. They didn't even tell me, and they bought their first crypto. Right?
It's my bad, because I'm still under the assumption that moment is not yet upon us.
That has happened. So that was a very, very big moment for me, to be honest.
Okay.
Right? And that kind of resonated a lot with me, and pushed me to solve more problems in India, right? And probably that is one of the major reasons that we are doing so well, is because we keep on pushing, we keep on understanding our users more and more and trying to solve their problems each day, right? Coming back to your question, if you don't mind repeating it once again.
So my question was, it is one thing to implement all of these, or even
where the ideas comes from.
Because see, we recently kicked off a column which we haven't done justice to, which I call the 1K column. So the first 1,000 customers. Those are very tender moments, right? In the world of humans, especially with babies, there is it's not actually a disease. There is something called as a sudden infant death syndrome.
Sure.
And the funny thing is, the way it happens is you put the baby to sleep, you wrap the baby, and you go about doing your work. And somewhere along the way, the baby will wake up, and it is trying to wriggle out of the tight wrap. And if the wrap and this is not just a cause of the wrap being loose, the baby will turn over, and because they don't yet have strength in their arms and legs, they'll die of suffocation. Sure. Because the bed is possibly obstructing their nose, and they're not even aware of it. So in the world of startups, there is a sudden startup death syndrome, and that sudden startup death is they don't even know that they need to do all these things. So they're unaware. So it is one thing to be doing it unconsciously, and a totally different thing to be doing it consciously. In your case, something tells me that you are doing it consciously, and therefore my question is, where did all of this knowledge come from? And you are a rarity amongst startups that I have seen, because you started in 2017. By 2020, you have hit that big goal of getting your parents to buy crypto. You've simplified it. You have survived the Indian crypto ban. You have gone on to 800,000 users. You've become profitable. You've been funded by Sequoia, and that's all in a span of 3 years. That's a lot of progress. And I don't see that. And that comes from, it didn't happen by accident, for sure. It didn't happen because you are in crypto and crypto, oh, everybody is in crypto. It didn't happen because of that. It became because you personally have, the three of you and your startup, you have a certain approach, you have an outlook. And when you follow that, you're going to get there. Is that the case? And how did you develop that outlook?
Sure. So I think that comes from Amazon. So that is where I was disagreeing to your point that Amazon taught me the biggest lesson of my life. Understand your users, empathize with your users, right? Users are everything, right? Business is secondary. Your product, your users are first, right? And that is the lesson that we keep with us, always fighting for the user, right? Always trying to help them. It's not about pushing a product on them. It's about understanding their needs and solving that problem. And once you keep on solving user problem, you will succeed. There's no one who can stop you in doing that.
But let me go one level deeper, Ashish. The fact that you should be user-centric and you should focus on users is at one level.
Yeah.
I went to the next level, which is about understanding users' emotions.
Sure.
Take any product. A lot of products today are still positioned and communicated and sold rationally.
Yeah.
So the most famous example I can give is take the iPod, right? While everybody gives credit to Steve Jobs for that, but I'm sure it's some clever marketing company that came up with it. And the funny thing is, even after the iPod did that, nobody seemed to change their track. So SanDisk and all of them said 512 MB or 2 GB, 3 GB, whereas Apple kept saying 3,000 songs, 4,000 songs, 5,000 songs. So that is user centricity, right? So user doesn't think in terms of GB. I have no clue what GB actually means, but I actually know how many songs. If I have 10 CDs, I know my iPod needs to at least hold 200 songs, right? So, but then again, 10,000 songs that fit in your pocket.
Yes.
Now that is a play on emotion and simplicity. It goes beyond. Yes, it's a nuance and understanding users. So my question is, you just went over like an aeroplane, flies over an entire city. You said we did this. We gave them a small investment in the crypto space, and you actually gave them a stake. And you focused on emotions. You did a bunch of things. So my question is, it cannot just be Amazon. That's too simple an answer. I'm unwilling to take that as an answer.
That is another property of Amazon, which Amazon has taught me, right?
Okay.
Is hire people who are better than you.
Okay.
Right? So always raise the bar. If you're hiring a person, then that person should be better than 50% of the people who are currently in the company. So your bar always goes up, right? And when smart people work together, they come up with smart ideas, right? I'm the first member of the team, so that's why I'm the dumbest guy in the team, right? And
I'll disagree with that, but we'll go on.
So my team is one of the best teams, right? Obviously, I'm biased, but the kind of vigor that my team has of not giving up is something that I really, really appreciate, right? Of figuring out, fighting for the users, right? And having the same DNA that we have, right? And I think that is why we always love to fight these battles, right? Because there are people around us, we learn every day, they learn, and we together come up with these solutions and these ideas and implement these ideas, and you just know about the ideas which are kind of succeeded, right? But I haven't told you about the 99 ideas which we worked on that failed, right? So it's consistently trying to make sure that you do better is what makes us, or what has kept us going, and how we have reached so far is my team. It has nothing to do with who I am, who my co-founders are, right? It's absolutely my team. and the hard work, the kind of never give up attitude that they have. And obviously they are smart people, right? So that is another thing that I've learned from Amazon, that when you are around great people, good things will happen, right? So you would fail in a lot of things, but you don't have to succeed in everything. You just have to succeed in a few things, right? But as long as you keep on pushing, you keep on churning out hundreds and hundreds of ideas, some of them will succeed, right? So this is just the outcome of Amazon's learnings only, but a little different outcome, and all credit goes to my team, right? I'm just there to take interviews and talk about CoinSwitch, but they are the ones who are actually getting things done.
Interesting. It's very I can't put a finger on that feeling. It's so relatable, because when we talk with our team members internally, I keep telling them I see my role as a servant leader. I do not believe in the fact that I have all the ideas, and it should be an order taking universe where I'm coming up with all the ideas and you're the ones that are implementing it, and each of us have to add value to each other and make it, and all I'm responsible for is to create an environment where all of us can just put on our best show, right? So you're in effect saying somewhat the same thing. Let's talk about the founding team for a moment. You gave us a little bit of an inkling that you've known each other for are they college buddies? And
yeah, so Govind and I were we met at our NSIT counseling on day one of our college. We've been friends from ever since. We both from computer science, same class, same batch, same hostel. Vimal is a friend of a friend, one of my best friend from my school. So Vimal is his college mate. So ultimately we ended up all in the nearby colleges. Me and Govind in the same college, Vimal in the next college, and we kind of work together. Kind of our thinking always matches, right? It's about solving the problem, and our joy comes not because of making it big monetarily or things like that, but it comes from seeing smile on your user's face, right? And that's what drives us day in, day out, right? So we have known each other for 13 years, being hackathon buddies for years now, and have started this together because this was our own problem, and we were ourselves solving our own problem. And obviously Govind comes from Amazon as well. He like me, he joined Amazon right after college. He was head of their authorization team, which handles over 250 million user credential data security. So he's our security expert, and why CoinSwitch is such a secure platform. And Vimal comes from Zynga, leading Farmville 2, which is one of their largest social game. So all the engagement ideas that you think from CoinSwitch comes from him, right? Because he's our engagement expert, right? So we all come from different backgrounds, but with the same attitude, right? So that's what has always kept us together and kept us moving forward.
Very interesting. Very interesting. This has been very fascinating, and I usually ask this at the very beginning. And you've answered it in some sense. Solving a problem which fascinated you. Have you always wanted to be an entrepreneur?
To be honest, yes. I didn't knew that it's called entrepreneurship. To be honest, I always wanted to solve a problem and solve a big problem, right? Either be part of it. I'm totally fine being a part of the machine which solves a bigger problem, but ultimately solve a big problem which I could feel proud about, right? I didn't knew at that time that starting your company gives you that feeling, right? So I didn't knew whether I wanted to start a company, but once I started the company, I get that feeling every single day, right? And that's what keeps me going.
You make it sound so easy. I've always long looked at people who make difficult things look easy. They're in some sense, it's like artists. They're just fiddling away, and then amazing music comes out of that, or their fingers just seem to be traversing the keys, and then you hear great music. And but it's an evolution. You don't get there in a day. But it's in some sense the journey you had with Prime Now, and then eventually what happened with Urban Tailor. So the best is yet to come, I suppose, right? Let's touch upon the funding journey a little bit. You've had 2 startups that have both been funded. Talk about the funding journey in both of them.
Sure. So Urban Tailor was funded by a few of the great Myntra guys who came on early. Before even the company was founded, we had money in the bank to run those experiments. And we got a seed from USF and, I didn't think we did justice because we couldn't solve the problem, but we tried our best in solving that.
Was there somebody that knew the connects with the Myntra guys, as a result of which the money came in?
Vasu and Lavanya both comes from Myntra, and that is the reason Raveen, who was the co-founder of Myntra, already knew them very well, and funded us. Yeah. So funded us, Raveen and Sanjay, right? So you would know Sanjay as well. So Raveen and Sanjay both funded us before we even started, right? And USF, obviously, we didn't knew them right away, but had connects from friends and who could connect us to, what their mission was aligned to what we are trying to solve, which is creating impact in people's life, right? So it's an impact-driven fund. So that's where our synergies kind of lied, and we started working with them, with Sequoia, and although I don't disclose a lot of funding details about CoinSwitch, but Sequoia was our early backers. So we formed our company officially on 13 December. On 23rd December, we had a term sheet from Sequoia, and that just because they liked us. They didn't knew crypto. They didn't knew anything about crypto. And they just felt like that, you are the guys that we could trust to learn from. So they just gave us the money at that point. But even after raising the funds, like I said, right, we never wanted to build a product which is driven by money, but which is driven by user actually paying for solving his problem, right? So we always ran after profitability. Sequoia's money still lies in our bank account, which is a reminder of that funding and that support from them. And they've been an amazing partners. And it's not just about money, it's about helping us navigate these difficult waters. Shailesh, who is the partner MD at Sequoia, has been an amazing guide all the 3 years and helping us reach where we are today and hopefully go much beyond from where we are from today. We have some other funding news which would hopefully come out very soon, and I'll be able to shed light on it then. But yeah, so this has been our journey so far.
Awesome. Was there somebody that made an intro to Sequoia? How did that connection happen?
So that was very and I got to know about it just recently, to be honest, who made the intro. So Kunal Shah actually was a YC partner, and at that time we applied to YC and got selected. So Kunal mentioned to Sequoia's partner that there is a company who's doing something in crypto. Why don't you talk to them? And they ultimately, we were working at LiftSpace at that point. They ultimately connected someone at LiftSpace, and that LiftSpace guy knew us, and that's how this connection happened. So thanks to Kunal for making the intro. And I just got to know about it, I think 2 months back. Wow. When I was talking to Kunal. So yeah.
Interesting. So what's in store for CoinSwitch now that some of the key initial goals have been met? You made it simple. You obviously there is much distance to go. There are millions and billions of people interested in the crypto world, and obviously that's definitely where you're headed. But in terms of your next few years, where is it headed?
So CoinSwitch started as a crypto company because obviously at heart we were all crypto lovers. But during our journey, we have realized one bigger problem that we wanted to solve, right? And that problem is, I don't know if you would be able to relate to it, but the problem is that when you have money, when you are an HNI, say, right? Everyone wants to, help you grow your money. You have a lot of avenues out there. You can go to Goldman Sachs, you can go to banks, give out your money, who help you grow your money, right? But for retail users, there aren't any avenues. Retail users first has to work hard to earn his money. Then he has to work equally harder to grow his money as well, right? So if CoinSwitch can simplify the way people do investments and can help them in this entire process, not becoming an expert in every field would be necessary for retail users, but can we give them data-driven insights from the platform to help them make better and faster decisions into their investment journey is ultimately the goal of the company, right? Making money work for itself rather than retail user working equally hard to grow their money, right? And that's why, we started with crypto. Very soon we are diversifying into different asset classes as well, helping users create a comprehensive portfolio, giving them opportunities across markets, which so I usually equate ourselves with how Robinhood kind of revolutionized the way investment is done in the US. If we could achieve even 1% of that in India, I think we would have done our job, right? So that is where we want to reach. Simplify investments,
Amazing.
Not just remain a crypto platform.
Amazing. I'm sure the same simplicity ethos that you have brought to CoinSwitch today it remains. Things are changing. Zerodha and a whole host of other people have at least started knocking on the doors of democratizing investing in India, and they've started putting together. If and not a day passes by us not hearing about Zerodha or Nitin, who was actually our the speaker on our first episode, the fabulous guy. But even today, for instance, if we take the whole Warren Buffett's notion that when you actually buy a share, you're actually buying a piece of the business, right? And it is it's not even counterintuitive. It is a very simple notion. When normal people, even retail investors, make an investment, when they make a fixed deposit, the funny thing about a fixed deposit is it's got a number on it which says, I pay 6% or 7%. But the fixed deposit is not a share in the bank. Yeah. It just happens to be an instrument with a earning rate on top of it. But when it comes to a share, there is no interest rate on top of it. But people still do a comparison, and instead of understanding the business and the intricacies of it, they go into charts and analysis, which works at a different level, which doesn't work for the retail investor, right? Yeah. So a quant-driven one, which is possibly betting on million shares here, million shares there, and a split penny leverage that will just drive a $2 million profit on that particular trade, works for someone else. It doesn't necessarily work for you. So, but you have to think about this in a totally different way. It's a fabulous goal to have. So it's been a fascinating conversation, Ashish. I never saw an hour and a half pass by. You covered great aspects on growing, the basics of it. And I'm glad when in the pre-brief, we discussed about not focusing on growth hacks, but rather the process of getting there. And I think you did full justice to it. So I know there'll be greater peaks that you'll scale in CoinSwitch, and we will come back to you and then have that conversation again to see what that vantage point looks like. 2 words from you for budding entrepreneurs and people who are struggling with growth right now.
I think when people think about growth, they think about flipping a switch, right? Today they are nothing. Today they will do something that tomorrow they will be everything, right? 99% of the companies, and obviously there are exceptions which are out there, 99% of the companies don't grow like this, right? Even if I take our example, we didn't grow like this. For the first 6 months, we were trying to find that hack, the hackers we are, but we couldn't find it. But once we look back, right, every idea that we implemented keeps us incrementally pushing forward, right? And when you look back, then you can see that 20x, 100x graph, right? But it's very unlikely that you would stumble upon an idea which would make your company go simply viral, right? So my suggestion is not to stop looking for that viral movement, but start appreciating the smaller jumps that you see and start working on incremental growth. 5% weekly growth is good enough to make you $1 billion company, right? But how do you achieve that 5% growth becomes challenging as well, right? So instead of just focusing on how do I grow to 100, 200, 300% a month, start focusing on smaller and achievable targets is something that would keep you pushing and, keep you keeping you, involved and keep on solving that problem.
Very well put. Very well put. Reasonable growth for an extended period of time done in a consistent manner will look like extraordinary growth when the outcome is actually achieved.
Yeah.
Right? And then that works very well for the world of investing as well. Right?
Yes.
So we wish you the very best. And I know CoinSwitch will change the face of crypto very soon as well.
Yes. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this story. If this story made a difference to you, tell us by leaving a comment on the website or our social media channels. Help us spread the love by subscribing, liking, and sharing our show. We welcome speaker suggestions and collaboration. Write to me at tanya@maharajasofscale.com.